Keegan Akin and Yennier Cano, both coming off down years in 2025. Can either bounce back for the Orioles this year? We'll talk about that coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Monday, January 26th, 2026, and welcome back in to the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we continue our season review series for the Orioles in 2025, going player by player. And today we're going to talk about two veteran relievers who have really been big parts of the Orioles bullpen for a few years now, but definitely each took a step back in 2025. That's Yennier Cano and Keegan Akin. Both are still on the roster and both are expected to be on the opening day roster. But can the Orioles count on one or both of them bouncing back in 2026? We'll break down each of their seasons, what went right and what went wrong, and really what adjustments each guy can make moving forward, and then maybe try and find the next Keegan Akin or Yennier Cano in the Orioles bullpen. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. So we're going to start today's episode with Keegan Akin, because you kind of look in the Orioles bullpen right now, and I've talked about this a bunch already this offseason. They've got options in terms of lefties, but there is not the guy in there anymore. Between, Cionel Perez in 2022 and Danny Coulombe in 2023, and, Gregory Soto, parts of 24 and 25. The Orioles have always kind of had a dude in terms of a lefty in their pen. And Keegan Akin was along for the ride in each of those years, but he was never the number one lefty. You look at the roster now, and there's an argument to be made, depending on how you feel about Dietrich Enns, that Akin might be the top lefty in that bullpen. And the way he pitched last year, I don't know if you feel super comfortable about that. So let's begin with the season review for Keegan Akin. 30-year-old left-handed pitcher. He will be 31 on April 1st, so just before opening day. And the big thing for Akin is he is into his final year of pitching with the Orioles, potentially. Now, we don't know exactly what his salary number will be because it seems like him and the Orioles are going to salary arbitration, but he is due to be a free agent for the first time after the 2026 season. So this could be his final year in Baltimore. In 2025, he continued to eat up innings out of the bullpen. He made 64 appearances, pitched 63 and a third innings for the Orioles. And on the surface, his 3.41 ERA made it seem like, hey, he was a pretty good reliever. But when you dive a little bit deeper, it was a 4.67 expected ERA, a 4.94 FIP. There was a ton of good luck involved for Keegan Akin. You add that to the fact that his 22% strikeout rate plummeted from the year before, and he more than doubled his walk rate up to 12.3% this season. It was a shaky 2025, to say the least. So let's begin with what went right for Keegan Akin this year. I would say in terms of role, he kind of got the pseudo closer role there for a while at the end of the year for the Orioles. Of course, at the deadline or around the deadline, they traded 4 relievers. Andrew Kittredge, Brian Baker, Gregory Soto, and Sir Anthony Dominguez were all dealt away. And Felix Bautista hurt his shoulder right around then and was out for the year. They lost 5 of their 8 relievers in the span of a few weeks. So the Orioles needed relievers and they needed a closer. And Keegan Akin was one of the only guys who kind of stuck around for the entire time. And if you look at how he pitched post-trade deadline, the final 2 months of the season, his leverage index over at FanGraphs, which measures how high leverage are these spots you're coming into, his total leverage index in the final 2 months led all Orioles relievers by far. Now, he did pick up 8 saves, which was nice for him. He only had 3 of them in his career prior to 2025, but there were also some ninth innings that didn't go so well, and we'll get to that. Now, in terms of the stuff for Akin, I thought his changeup was really, really good in 2025. It was a +6 for StatCast run value. It was a complete no pun intended, change for him this year. In the past, the changeup had kind of been his worst pitch. It had accumulated a negative 21 run value in his first 5 years in the big leagues. Now, the movement profile was pretty similar on the pitch. He did throw it about a mile per hour harder. It was up to averaging almost 87 on that changeup, and he definitely located it better and threw it more than ever. He threw that changeup about 20% of the time. Guys hit just 101. That was the opposing batting average against the off-speed pitch for Akin last season. And it really is the pitch that just makes him so much better against right-handed hitters, right? They hit just 196 against Keegan Akin last year, while they've hit 251 against him in his career. So that made him a little more useful in different outings. Although it's funny because as a lefty who generally used to be a multi-inning reliever, you want to be good against righties because you're going to roll through the lineup righty or lefty. And it's funny that the year he finally figured out righties a little bit more is the year he became more of a one-inning reliever and less of kind of a multi-inning guy, which we'll get to. Because despite a 3.41 ERA, there was plenty that went wrong in this season for Keegan Akin. First of all, yes, did he get a lot of high leverage chances? He did. He was also really, really bad in those high leverage spots. He had 6 blown saves to go with the 8 saves he got. And I mean, Yarmil Geraldo, Dietrich Enns, Yennier Cano, Corbin Martin, some of these guys got some save chances as well down the stretch, but really because of experience and seniority, it seemed like under interim manager Tony Mansolino, Keegan Akin got the lion's share of those save opportunities. And in those high leverage spots, when he was pitching, in the ninth or in extras, opponents slugged .508 against Akin. His FIP was well over 5 in those chances. And that's kind of been the story for Keegan Akin even prior to 2025, even when the bullpen was in a better spot, even when the Orioles were a playoff team. And he was an important middle reliever, multi-inning guy. But the story was always, hey, you get Akin in medium and low leverage spots in the middle of the game, he'll be great. You find him in the high leverage at all, and he's terrible. Like, you look at him in low leverage, 404 slugging in medium leverage, 317 slugging in low leverage. That is his spot. The lights get too bright for Keegan Akin, and he crumbles. It's kind of been how it's been his whole career. But 2025 by far is the most we've ever seen him in high leverage scenarios. And that's why I felt like it stood out a whole lot more. Because after August 1st, when the Orioles traded all those relievers away and Akin went into this different role, it was 24 and a third innings, 24 appearances, 3.70 ERA, but a 5.81 FIP. If your FIP is more than 2 runs better than your ERA, you got insanely lucky. His strikeout rate fell to 21%. His walk rate jumped even higher to 14%. He was not a good pitcher who was getting a lot of good batted ball luck. And again, he had the highest leverage index. So he was coming in the most high leverage spots for the Orioles, despite having the worst FIP and the worst walk rate of any reliever in that Orioles bullpen. That is probably the thing that annoyed me most out of anything in the Orioles 2025 season, besides the fact that, of course, they took a giant step back. It was that at the end of the year, they traded 4 relievers. Bautista was hurt. They had all these interesting arms they brought in. They knew it was kind of an audition for these guys heading into 2026 with a lot of bullpen spots open for now this year's Orioles. And they did audition a lot of guys, but not very many of them got a real shot in the 9th inning. And I thought those last 2 months of last year would have been a perfect time to give some of these interesting guys with good stuff a chance in high leverage. And instead, the O's just went to Akin again and again. And I get it. In theory, he should be ready to take those spots more because he's been in the big league since 2020. He's been a reliever for a long time. He's been on these good teams. But after the first couple of times when it went poorly, my thinking was like, okay, Akin's probably going to be back on the Orioles in 2026, but there's no chance Akin's going to be an 8th or 9th inning guy on the 2026 Orioles. And if he makes the team, he's going to be a middle reliever. So why would you be putting these in his spots? It's not helping the O's because he stinks at it. It's not helping Akin because this is not the role he's going to pitch in next year. It's not like it's preparing him to be the closer. And it's not helping the younger guys because they're not getting a chance to get their feet wet in high leverage spots when at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter because the Orioles are out of it. That, whether it was Elias or Mansolino or together on those decisions, that frustrated me more than anything last year. It felt like you were just hindering development to throw Keegan Akin out there. And I didn't understand it. And the other thing for Akin was he kind of stopped being so versatile. And maybe that was pointed by the Orioles because they wanted him in more high leverage spots. But, he made 64 appearances last year. Only 14 of them were games where he pitched more than one inning, and only 5 of them did he go 2 innings or more. That was way less versatility. In 2024, he had 14 appearances of 2+ innings, and 25 of his 66 outings were more than 1 inning. So he had been much more of a guy who could give you multiple innings. This year, he became a 1-inning reliever. He just doesn't have the stuff to kind of do that, and it showed again. And really, the worst part of Akin's season was the walk rate. The big thing you could always count on from Keegan Akin when he moved to the bullpen is that he was going to throw strikes, right? He had a 6.1% walk rate in 2024. That is awesome. That is well below league average. It's pretty much been sitting around 6% for him since he became a full-time reliever in 2022. It's been super helpful for the Orioles. It more than doubled to a 12.3% walk rate in 2025, kind of out of nowhere. The only major league pitcher who had a larger jump in his walk rate from 24 to 25 was Angels starter Jack Kohanowitz. And for Kohanowitz, I mean, it was mostly because he got healthy finally and more than doubled his innings pitched, and he was also a starter. So he threw way more innings, had way more chances, and also finally got to show like who he is. So the fact that he had a smaller walk rate before was probably just a small sample size thing. Akin's small walk rate was because that's the pitcher he was, and then it all completely changed. Now, he was throwing this ball in the strike zone a little bit less, but like his chase rate got higher, which is good. His first pitch strike rate got higher, which is good. The amount that guys were swinging against him got higher. All those things should not lead to your walk rate doubling. It's honestly quite weird that the walk rate doubled. The only thing you can look at is that his swing and miss percentage dropped by more than 5% from 2024 to 25. What it really means is instead of Akin putting batters away when he got to 2 strikes, it was a lot more foul balls, a lot more extended at bats, and those would eventually lead to guys, down the road and pitch 8 or 9, taking ball 4 and drawing walks. You add that to the fact that he has worst career location plus number, and that's how you get to a doubled walk rate. Just kind of absurd that he got to that point. And then the one other concerning thing is that the fastball had always been a weapon for Akin. It's never been crazy high velocity on that pitch. Like he's usually sitting 94 is what we've seen from him as a reliever. And that's where he was mostly this year, 93.7 he averaged on the 4-seamer. But that pitch always had good induced vertical break numbers, had that kind of riding action on it. It would get pop-ups and lazy fly balls and swing and miss. It just used to be a much better pitch. It was a 114 stuff plus with 18 inches of induced vertical break in 2024. That's a great fastball. His IVB went down to 17. His stuff plus went down to 102 in 2025. Opponents slugged 566 against it last year when it was 392 the year before. Went from a +7 to a -5 run value. Every single stat on that fastball got worse. Now, his arm angle did drop 4 degrees from year over year. That's something that can really change how one of those rising 4-seam fastball plays. He just looked different. Could it have been injury? Maybe. He did go on the injured list on July 1st with some shoulder inflammation. Missed about a month. He returned on July 28th. But, I mean, pre-injury, 4.35 FIP, post-injury, 5.82 FIP. So maybe it was a shoulder thing. That's certainly something. But if you're the Orioles and you know Akin's still dealing with some sort of shoulder thing, why are you then throwing him into the 9th inning every day as soon as he comes back from missing a month with shoulder inflammation? Just, it doesn't point to the fact that injury was the only concern here. It points to the fact that relievers are volatile and maybe Akin is on the downtrend. So what are the biggest storylines for his 2026? I think the biggest question is, who is the real Keegan Akin? Is he the guy who was an X factor with these, incredible strikeout to walk numbers that he gave the Orioles? He gave the Orioles almost 80 innings in relief in 2024 with a 31% K rate and a 6% walk rate. I mean, he was awesome that year. Awesome. He was one of the most valuable players in their bullpen and was kind of an unsung hero of that team. Is that your Keegan Akin, or is it the guy who became a 1-inning bad reliever for most of the time we saw him in 2025? And that leads to the next question, which is Akin's roster spot in danger if he continues to struggle? Like, he's out of options. He's been on this team for a while. They don't have a number 1 lefty. I think it would be shocking to me if Akin did not make the Orioles opening day roster if he's healthy. But again, he is a free agent after 2026. He is out of options. the Wolfram, Dietrich Enns, Josh Walker group of lefties. The O's won't want to DFA Akin right away, but if he starts the season, we look in April and May, and he's still struggling, he could absolutely be gone because there's guys who are younger with better stuff who are more controllable, and Akin's got questions. And if he can't find that old fastball, that might be the big thing. He's not a super valuable reliever, especially if he's no longer going multiple innings in outings. I'm not sure how much he can help the Orioles. Again, I think he's going to be on the opening day roster, but beyond that, it's going to be up to Keegan Akin to change things. And if he doesn't, he may not even be able to finish this season with the Orioles. But a guy who had kind of a similar level of struggle to Keegan Akin in 2025 was Yennier Cano. Now, Cano had some higher highs in his career than Akin, but he's also showed maybe even some lower lows. So what in the world happened to Cano last year, and can he fix it in 2026? We get to that coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding with the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everyone's been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season, make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. And if you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. So make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. The last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. So from one struggling reliever in 2025, who's been a veteran of this team, we move to another. Yennier Cano, 31-year-old righty who will be 32 coming up here in March, also did not have his best season and really seemed to fall off a cliff a little bit in 2025. Final numbers for him: 65 appearances for the Orioles, 58 innings. He posted a career worst 5.12 ERA with a 4.27 FIP. His strikeout rate did fall to 21%. His walk rate stayed about the same at 9.6%, still a concerning number. And opponents hit 277 against Cano in 2025. So let's begin with what went right for the Orioles right-hander, and that is Cano still continued to produce ground balls and get soft contact, kind of the bread and butter for Cano since he became an all-star in 2023. His, about 55% ground ball rate allowed was his lowest since 2022, but it was also still the 17th best among qualified relievers in Major League Baseball this year. So even a lessened version of Cano is still getting more grounders than most guys. And again, most ground balls, the worst that can happen is a single. You let the ball in the air, a lot worse things that can happen. So relievers that tend to keep the ball on the ground tend to be able to do a little bit better. He allowed a 4.7% barrel rate. That was the lowest of his career. That was in the 93rd percentile. You'd like to see that. And the 35% hard hit rate he allowed, also his lowest since 2022. It was down 8% from the previous season. These are all good things that under the hood tell me Cano can still be a good reliever despite his inflated ERA. And a lot of that's because he's still throwing a good sinker. Now, the velo did drop. It was sitting about 96. It did drop to sitting 95.1 in 2025, so you don't love that. But the pitch still gets a ton of ground balls. And even though the stuff plus raw number kind of went down, it's still a good pitch overall. And I think really my favorite thing about Yennier Cano, and is why I will continue to believe in him even after a season with an ERA over 5, is that he was willing once again in 2025 to tinker with his other pitches besides the sinker to make himself better. In 2024, when Cano had a little stretch of struggling, he added the four-seam fastball, he changed the shape of his slider, and it got his season back on track. In 2025, the big addition was adding a splitter. He had that old changeup, which was crazy effective in the All-Star season in 2023, especially at getting left-handed hitters out. It allowed him to not have a huge split. But in 2025, overall, guys hit 417 with a 667 slug against his changeup, and lefties specifically hit it even harder. So Cano had to figure out, I don't have my old changeup anymore. He was throwing it harder and it was getting too close in velo and movement to his sinker, so it wasn't really a changeup anymore by the name of the word, right? It was too similar of a pitch. So in August, Cano was looking around in a tough season and being like, what can I do? Well, he basically got rid of his old changeup. It's not to say it won't come back because it used to be a really good pitch and I could totally see him bring it back at some point. But he said, let me try something new. And he added the splitter. It's been a very popular pitch in Major League Baseball over the past couple of years. Once again, he dropped the velo, so the changeup was up to 92, but his splitter was sitting at 90, so it gave him a little more difference between the sinker and the splitter. And the splitter had less left to right movement, so it wasn't tailing away as much from left-handed hitters as the changeup did, but it had double the amount of drop, straight down drop that the old changeup did. So it was more of a straight down pitch rather than a fading to the right kind of pitch that the righty was throwing. And what did it do? Well, it did numbers. Overall, in the 2 months he threw it, opponents hit just 182 with a 42%, that is very high, swing and miss rate with 0 extra base hits against that Cano splitter. And he liked it so much that get to September, the final month of the season, he was just like, I'm a splitter guy. 54% of his pitches in September were splitters. That's odd for Cano because he's just going to dominate by throwing his sinker more than anything else and then kind of jump in the off-speed pitches. No. He said, it's splitter time. Let's go. Now, his overall numbers didn't get a ton better in September because of that. He still had an ERA over 4, but he found a pitch he liked, and he found a pitch that worked. It didn't turn him back into all-star Cano, but September was a little better than July and August were, and it was all because of that splitter. And at the end of the day, he still stayed healthy, and that's something he's done pretty well since being called up by the Orioles in 2023. Cano was one of the very few Orioles who did not land on the injured list at any point in 2025. Yeah, that's kind of a low bar to clear, but it's nice to have a guy who could at least post out there for you, even if there were some struggles. And there were definitely struggles, right? What went wrong in Cano's season? Well, generally what went wrong is basically everything across the board got worse from 2024 into 2025. ERA, FIP, strikeout rate, walk rate, overall stuff plus, ground ball rate, number of innings pitched, home runs per 9 allowed, average launch angle allowed. All of it got worse in 2025. And again, when you post a 5.12 ERA, it's probably not going to be a good year. And that is what happened. Now, there's really not a lot of analysis to do besides stuff got a little worse. Stuff plus dropped from 112 to 103, and command got worse. And this was a guy who in 2023 could always rely on his command, right? He was rolling with a 4% walk rate. It jumped up to 9.6% in 2024, and it stayed right there in 25. That was going to be a big part of his season going into last year. Can he get that walk rate back down? And he could not, and the strikeout rate dropped along with it. And that is a big problem because even though he's a guy who is keeping the ball on the ground, when his command got so much worse, location plus was a kind of a all-encompassing command stat where 100 is about it. When it drops from 111 to 99, that's concerning. That means fewer swings and misses. That means fewer ground balls. That means more fly balls and just more balls in play in general because the strikeout rate went down. Even though you're still getting a lot of grounders, if you have more and more balls in play, more and more balls are going to find holes, get down the line for singles or doubles, and those are going to add up. And when you're also walking guys and giving other free base runners, it tends to snowball. And that is exactly what happened to Yennier Cano. I think really his low moment of the season was actually getting optioned to AAA. Now, some of it was because Cano had minor league options, and he still has minor league options in 2026, which is important to this conversation. And the Orioles kind of needed a fresh arm. But on June 22nd, Cano, who was less than 2 years prior an all-star, was sent to AAA. Now, he came back on July 2nd, so it was not even 2 weeks that he spent down in Norfolk. But weirdly enough, he's optioned on June 22nd. June was his best month of the season. He had a 32% strikeout rate, 6% walk rate, 2.74 FIP. That looked like all-star level Cano in June. And 7 of his previous 8 appearances were scoreless before he was optioned. It was just one of these spots where he had some struggles, he had options, and the Orioles needed a fresh arm at that point in the season. And he had also just allowed 4 earned runs in 2/3 of an inning 3 days before getting optioned as well. So the numbers were worse after he came back. So it's not like he went down, worked on something, and the switch came on. But at least that did force him to change something. He drops the changeup, he learns the splitter, and he finished the season a little bit stronger. So biggest storylines for Cano in 2026. First of all, will this new splitter stick, and can it bring him back, right? He still has good enough raw stuff, really good sinker at 95, interesting slider, interesting four-seamer. That's the stuff to be a good reliever. He was just an all-star in 2023. He was still really, really good in 24. And the splitter looked dominant. And again, he threw it more than half the time in September. He's not going to throw it more than half the time forever, but it's a pitch that could be his number 2 offering now instead of the old changeup, and it could mold him and save him to be a big league reliever. Will that be the case, or is his arm just maybe cooked, right? He'll be 32 this year. The Orioles have just, used him so much since they called him up early in the 2023 season. 190 and 2/3 innings Cano has thrown since he was called up on April 14th of 2023. Since that date, only 7 big league relievers have thrown more innings in baseball than Yennier Cano. He's been used a ton. He's been the most used Oriole in that stretch. And while he's stayed very, very healthy, kind of surprisingly, in those 2.5 years, despite so much usage, you can tell that near the ends of seasons, his arm starts to run down a little bit. The Orioles tried to pull back on his usage this year, which I think will be helpful moving forward. But you just always get concerned if there could be an injury that arises here as well. So it is possible that Yennier Cano is just never the same again. And that happens. There's sometimes these pop-up relievers who have these amazing, Jeremy Lin type runs and get to an all-star game and then just kind of fizzle out. I think Cano has good enough stuff to stick around. He has 2 more option years, and he's not a free agent until after 2028. So at the very worst, the Orioles could stick him back in AAA and hold on to him. They're not going to DFA Yennier Cano. The stuff is too good, and when you can freely send him to AAA to keep him in the org, you're going to do that. So maybe he's not a high leverage guy anymore, but Yennier Cano can easily still be a good middle reliever for the 2026 Orioles. He's going to stick around in the organization. The question is, can he change enough? Is the arm fresh enough? I don't need him to get back to 2023 All-Star Cano. I just need a solid middle reliever out of him. I think he can do it, but only time will tell when he gets back on the mound this season. So that's Akin. That's Cano. That's 2 guys who were really good for a while and then struggled last year. That's what happens to relievers, though. And you got to find new ones. Who could be the new versions of these guys for the Orioles? That's coming up next to finish off the show. First, want to tell you about the Everydayer Club before we get to kind of who the next Cano and Akin are. I want to thank you for making Locked On Orioles your first listen of the day, and thanks for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You already live your team every day. Now it's time to take it up a level and go ad-free. That's right, the show without the ads. Join the Everydayer Club today and get Locked On Orioles with no interruptions, members-only Discord access as well, where we're talking O's over there with me and other Orioles fans, and more. All for just $5 per month or $50 per year. Just go to lockedonorioles.supercast.com or check the link in the show notes to learn more. So the reality of bullpens and relievers is that there are only a select few guys who stay good their whole career. Most guys ebb and flow. Relievers, are hot for a month, bad for a month, good for 1 year, bad for 1 year. It's up and down. Some guys fizzle out early, then come back later in their career. You can never really count on a reliever truly year to year. The Orioles learned that in 2025 with the struggles of Keegan Akin and Yennier Cano. So they obviously want both of those guys to get back on track in 2026, and the hope is that they both will. But you also need to be looking around for who is the next Yennier Cano and who is the next Keegan Akin that you can backfill if those guys continue to struggle. And I think the Orioles might have those 2 guys in-house right now. So Yennier Cano, when he came in, was a 28-year-old with good stuff, came over in the Jorge Lopez trade, kind of had no idea where it was going when he joined the O's in 2022. How about Cade Stroud? He's 27. When he debuted last year, good stuff, kind of lacks command. His stuff plus numbers very similar to Cano in 2023. Stroud also showed some very similar elite batted ball data in 2025, low barrel rate, low hard hit rate, high ground ball rate. That could be your next Cano. Or could it be someone like Yarmiel Geraldo, right? Flashed a really interesting changeup, had similar AAA numbers to Cano. He's even older at 31, but a guy who could certainly have a breakout year. Those are the 2 guys I would target. And then if you're trying to find the next Keegan Akin, I think it might be pretty simple. Keegan Akin was a pretty good starting pitching prospect who showed flashes, but never had any consistency as a starter. And then he found it when he went to the bullpen. He had basically 2 big league seasons as a starter before he became a reliever. Also had some interesting data on his fastball and his changeup. He could get righties out pretty well. That sounds a whole lot like Cade Povich, right? Another lefty with not a high velocity fastball, but has good metrics on it with a solid changeup. And now Povich, who's had these times through the order issues and is probably being pushed out of the rotation, plus the Orioles, as we talked about, being kind of light on lefty relievers in their bullpen right now, might be one of the easier comps ever because Povich might go to the bullpen anyway for two reasons. One, he's the number 7 starter as I record this right now on Sunday. I'd say Bradish, Rogers, Boz, Kramer, Eflin, Tyler Wells, all above Povich. And if the Orioles add another starter like we expect, Povich goes down to number 8. Now, he does have minor league options, so he could begin the year in the Tides bullpen or in the Tides rotation, but he could also help the Orioles in the big league bullpen. And you look at the times through the order effect for Povich, he had a 2.96 ERA facing the order the first time through last season, a 5.66 ERA second time through, and a 10.42 ERA the third time through. That's a pitcher who is still in his mid-20s and still has time to figure it out, but is inching towards maybe a move to the bullpen. It feels pretty similar to what happened to Keegan Akin with similar kind of stuff, and he could even help the Orioles as early as 2026. So I do think they have a couple of options in there if they do have to backfill these two spots, because it could be the end for guys like Akin and Cano really being dominant out of the bullpen at the big league level. That'll do it for today's episode. Hope all is going well with the snowstorm as I'm recording here on Sunday morning and looking out the window, and the snow is still continuing to fall. Hopefully, if you're able, you can have a little bit of fun with the snow. If it's impacting your day, your weekend, your ability to go and do things, hopefully it can clear out for you as quickly as possible. With snow comes ice as well. And as we all know, ice has no place in our communities and only brings bad things. So wishing all of you the best out there as well. That'll do it for today's episode. I will be back on Wednesday. We will continue to talk about relievers, some interesting guys that kind of popped up in the bullpen this year for the Orioles: Cade Stroud, Rico Garcia, Chase McDermott. We're going to talk about all of them and how they fit in with the O's coming up on Wednesday's episode. And of course, if we get any breaking Framber Valdez news, we'll have an earlier episode as well. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.